Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Welcome. This is the much vaunted, much promised session with Dr. Sara Pugh, PhD. I've been talking this up, so anyone that doesn't, expect this and know who Sara is, basically her PhD is in mechanisms of biochemistry. After that, she did a couple of postdoc things, one of which was in neurodegeneration, and the other in HMG coenzyme A reductase inhibitors. Statins, everybody, statins. Not good things, obviously, statins. That's probably one of the things that Sara will cover with us today. The topic is largely around fasting, effects of fasting. I think that it's long overdue that we got someone of Sara's caliber along to tell us about this stuff. I've actually had the pleasure of seeing most of this presentation in its final draft formation a couple of weeks ago. So, look, you are in for an absolute treat. You are in for so much information, you won't believe it. So get your notepads and pens together. Get yourselves ready for an absolute treat, and I'll throw it over to her. Ladies and gentlemen, Sara Pugh, PhD. All yours.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Bart. And just so people know a bit more about my background, my degree was actually in genetics and biochemistry, and also have a master's in bioinformatics, which is a sort of data mining for biological information. However, things have diverged quite a lot now. And as Bart said, we're going to be talking about fasting in this little podcast, but also something else I'm very interested in, which is biochemical detox. And we're also going to be covering aspects of the ketogenic diet, the carnivore diet, but mainly about how and why it might work and why do we get these wonderful results from fasting and changing certain ways of eating. So we're going to be diving deep into lots of biochemistry, but because I know some people like pictures and explained in layman's terms, I'll cover this topic as broadly as possible. So I'll get started. So what's this talk going to be about? So it's going to be about the biochemistry of fasting, the crossovers with the ketogenic diet and the carnivore way of eating, some hormone changes that happen during fasting, particularly focusing on AMPK, PGC1, mTOR, NRF2, FOXO, SERT, and glutathione, and then diving in from glutathione into heavy metals, xenobiotics, inflammation, and oxidative stress, because this is very important for health, but also when we get deeper into this podcast, I'll be talking about biochemical detox, and you'll understand how this can really help with fasting and carnivore, and why some people don't get on with these things initially. Then we'll talk about the organs and the pathways involved in biochemical detox, and then discuss some compounds and nutraceuticals which facilitate detox and fasting. And then we'll talk about some non-biochemical methods to facilitate the effects of fasting, because not everybody's interested in taking compounds. They want to do everything completely organically and naturally, which is all good. As some of you know, Bart did a 7-day fast, and I've done lots of different lengths fast and dry fast and a 7-day fast as well. So I'm very interested in what actually happens. So from a hormone level, when you fast, the things which go up are growth hormone, glucagon, cortisol, adrenaline and noradrenaline, BDNF, NRF2, reverse T3, autophagy related genes, FOXOs and sirtuins, LDL and HDL, NAD+, and AMPK. So as you can see, there's some useful things in there, and then a few things which aren't quite so useful. So you might think like maybe cortisol going up and reverse T3. So we'll come back into these a bit later. Then the things which get down-regulated during a fast would be T3, which is active thyroid, mTOR, which is the body's main growth pathway, testosterone, insulin, leptin, inflammatory cytokines, to some extent dopamine and dopamine receptors, and triglycerides. So before we get into the biochemistry, there are a few things that I'd like to point out about who shouldn't fast, and if they were interested in healing, would probably be better off doing a carnivore way of living instead. So people with migraines, because they're in a state of glucose deprivation already, and some people now begin to think it might be glucagon resistance, these particular people benefit from a way of eating where there is a more regular supply of nutrients. The ketones, of course, are great for migraines, but it's much better for those people to produce them using nutritional ketosis. Also, in pregnancy, because we don't know enough about fasting and there's so many hormonal changes going on, the body needs to be in a growth phase. So again, it probably isn't the best thing if you're pregnant. However, I'm not an expert in this. If you are pregnant and want to fast, there probably is somebody out there who could give you a better answer. People with eating disorders, because of the sort of regimented nature of when you go into a fast and you stick to it and controlling food, if somebody's had a problem with that in the past, going and doing a carnivore or a ketogenic way of eating would be better, because that way of eating helps people to manage their weight and mood naturally, and it doesn't involve this sort of calorie restriction which might have hampered them in the past. And then also people with toxin overload, they shouldn't really fast, and we'll come into this in much more detail later, because when you lose body fat or fast, you activate the detox pathway, but you also release a load of toxins which have been hiding in the body. And for these particular people, that's going to be unpleasant if they don't know about biochemical detox and how to do it. So we'll dive into why one of the reasons why people fast, which is for fat loss. And people who do a ketogenic diet are very familiar with this. So it would be about how we have about 200 calories worth of glucose stored as glycogen in our small fuel tank, which would be mainly the liver, but also the muscles and a small amount in the blood. And the body will preferentially use this small fuel tank unless you deplete it, which would be by restricting carbs or restricting food. And this can take between 12 and 36 hours, just depending on the person's biochemistry and what else they're doing. When it comes to the big fuel tank, which is the fat store, this is massive. Even on a very lean person, there can be 20 to 30,000 calories of fat. But sometimes I think of this situation a bit like a dragon sitting on a treasure trove, and it's not willing to give up its fat, its treasure, unless you could get the dragon off. So we'll come into some hormones which play a role in this. And of course, insulin plays a big role in locking this fat in. And when you do a fast or a ketogenic diet, you can manage that situation. So here we have quite a brief little diagram just to explain that when insulin is high, that's a storage mode, and the body goes into protein synthesis, fat synthesis, glycogen synthesis, and glucagon is low. And most things in biochemistry work as a push-pull or a seesaw. So when it's flipped the other way, we've got, say, a fasted state, glucagon dominates. So we've got breaking down of glycogen, breaking down of glucose, and gluconeogenesis, making glucose out of other substances such as glycerol and amino acids and such like, and also ketogenesis goes up. So that's one very important aspect of why people fast or do a ketogenic diet to lose body fat, is to manipulate this particular hormone pair. So when I did my fast, you can see down the edge, I took some readings of glucose and ketones throughout, just to sort of see graphically what was going on. But generally, the ketones are produced in the liver from the oxidation of fat, and you can create this situation by either fasting, exercising, or eliminating carbohydrates. Insulin inhibits the production of ketones, and like most things in biochemistry, it's not completely all or nothing. Ketone bodies are always present in the blood, but they really ramp up to high levels during a situation where you've taken insulin away. And then these ketone bodies travel through the blood to feed the brain, the heart, the muscles. They particularly receptive to ketone bodies, they happily use them. There are some cells which can't use ketones, which are red blood cells and some neurons. And then you can measure the ketones either in the urine, which would be sort of showing the excess. So there's so much ketones, you're actually weeing some out. So I wouldn't say it's the most accurate, but people like knowing what's going on, and it won't hurt, but not to get hung up if the stick is very pink or not very pink. It's sort of just more of a guideline. On the diagrams at the side, I've used a blood ketone measurer, which is more accurate. So when I was about halfway through the fast, it was 1.5 millimoles, and then my blood sugar was 3.9. And then you can see as I go through the fast, the ketone levels go up and up and up and up and up. And my blood sugar's kind of stabilized itself around 3.8, and I was perfectly happy there. I think the average is 5.5, but of course we can function at different levels of blood sugar depending on what's going on with the rest of the biochemistry. And then on day 6 to 7, I did a dry fast, and I'll talk a little bit about why people like doing dry fasts and what are the benefits. So when we come to doing a dry fast, here we have a slightly more complicated diagram. So what this is explaining is that there's sort of two pathways into the mitochondria. So we're looking at the mitochondria here. So we've got the blue path, which is using glucose, the GLUT4 transporter, glycolysis, and then we're making something called acetyl coenzyme A. And on the other side, the green pathway, we've got triglycerides, which come in as fatty acids and glycerol, and they go through their own transporters, and then via quite a lengthy process called beta oxidation, once again, the fatty acids produce acetyl-CoA, and most people know that fat has got much more energy in it than glucose because it can produce many more molecules of acetyl-CoA. We also know, because of something called the Randall cycle, that we either go down the blue path or the green path. The biochemistry is not particularly well equipped for doing both at the same time, and it can cause all kinds of problems such as inflammation. But Bart has covered that in much detail in one of his other YouTube videos. So we're in this situation now. We have our acetyl-CoA. Other things can feed in. So certain amino acids you can make via some processes, including deamination. You can produce acetyl-CoA, and also ketone bodies interchange between acetyl-CoA and themselves. Once we have our acetyl-CoA, it goes into something called the Krebs cycle, and this, to keep it very simple, produces some electrons, which we'll just call sort of money or change, some hydrogen and some FAD and NADH, which are important for running the electron transport chain, where the money or the electrons go in, oxygen goes in, and the electrons are carried down this chain. Coenzyme Q and cytochrome C help these enzymes make their way, these electrons make their way along the transport chain, and out of this we get heat, ATP, and water as products. There's much more to the electron transport chain than I've mentioned here. However, the take-home message from this is that because water is one of the end products, and if you were doing a dry fast and you're not taking any liquid, your body's going to do its absolute best to break down your fat and other things via autophagy, which we'll get to later. So it's breaking down protein, unwanted ones, and fat like crazy to get this very clean, deuterium-free metabolic water. So that's one of the reasons why people like dry fasting. But again, it's not for complete beginners, because there are complications due to how to manage salts and things to do with kidneys. However, it's not something that's dangerous or to be feared. It's, again, something to do your own research on and decide whether it's something you would like to try. Also, interestingly, acetyl-CoA can go off and do lots of things. So if there's lots of acetyl-CoA, it then gets converted into body fat. So acetyl-CoA can get used or it can get stored. So it's kind of this central molecule in energy utilization and storage. Also, acetyl-CoA is the the starting point of making cholesterol, which we'll come back to shortly. So another thing when we come to talking about fasting and low carb versus calorie restriction is that, and fat loss, why do calorie restriction diets always fail, and why are people successful with fasting and low carb? The little graph at the bottom, is just to touch on it, is a study that was over 9 years of women following a normal diet, and then women who were told to do the usual eat less and exercise more. And as you can see, over 9 years, it was a very large study. I can dig out the reference anyone needs. So that's your sort of randomized control study. You can see that overall there's about £0.5 pound difference. So pretty much that says calorie restriction doesn't work. Because basically a lot of the time people are just dipping into their small fuel tank, the one which uses sugar, and to compensate for this, the body slows the metabolism down and the person will just use whatever calories are coming in, so they don't really end up burning fat. However, when we come into something where we haven't got any carbs or no food, the body's going to see this massive, great big store of fat, and it's going to start taking energy from that store, and the metabolism stays reasonably the same. So say if you were getting 1,200 from food and then 800 from the big fuel tank from fat, your body's happy. It thinks, okay, I'm well fed, let's just rock on. So as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to touch on a little bit about cholesterol because it's important later when we talk about detox. So with acetyl-CoA, you can get it from basically everything. So you can be made out of protein, fat, glucose. So there's absolutely no sense at all in saying that saturated fat makes high cholesterol, because so many other things in the body can also end up being turned into acetyl-CoA. So it goes down this particular pathway, and on the way we have our friend the statins, which block HMG-CoA reductase. And on the way, there are certain important molecules I want to draw your attention to. So if you block your acetyl-CoA pathway, you're going to affect your coenzyme Q10, which has a job of carrying electrons in the electron transport chain, but it also plays a role in detoxification. And you're going to end up messing up the farnesylated protein. So farnesylation is just like a tag to help proteins find their way inside the cell of where they're supposed to be. And also you're going to end up messing up your vitamin D levels. And there's so much research coming out now of the utter importance of vitamin D in health. And also cholesterol gets made into bile salts, which is something very, very important for successful detox or well-being. And also it makes all of the sex hormones as well. And to add to that, cholesterol itself is key for membrane structure and integrity, and you need good membranes for all your cells to function. As people like to demonize the lipids, as in demonizing LDL, which is sort of we'd call it a lipid rather than cholesterol, LDL has a really important role in the body, including in fasting, because as I said earlier, it goes up because LDL is it's like part of a postal service. So it's like a parcel. So it's delivering nutrients and fat soluble vitamins to all the cells which need them. And also during fasting and the beginnings of a ketogenic diet, people are burning body fat like they should be, and it needs to be carried around and delivered to the organs which need it. Also, LDL plays a really important role in something called quorum sensing, which is to do with defending the body, because quorum sensing is sort of like a smoke bomb where the bacteria and invading pathogens get blinded, so they can't really see where they're going. So when you're in a fasted state, you want as much protection as possible. So again, that's another reason which possibly why LDL would go up. But again, in the general human, you do want as much protection as possible from invading bacteria. So cholesterol's in the skin to protect from sort of injuries there and all over the body. And also when LDL goes up in a fast or ketogenic diet, when you measure the lipids, most of the time you'll find that the HDL has gone up as well, because it's the ratio of LDL to HDL which is important, not the absolute numbers or the total cholesterol, because the HDL is then carrying the empty packages back to the liver. And when you're fasting, it's sort of like Christmas, if you want to sort of imagine this as a postal system scenario. So there's a lot going on. And also when you fast, you have something called autophagy, where you're breaking down old cells and with the view to grow new ones. So you're going to require cholesterol for this process. So what's this thing I've mentioned called autophagy? As many of you will know who do fast or read regularly on these topics, it's a completely natural and normal process that our bodies have developed over millions of years. So it's a survival mechanism where your body can make energy out of old and damaged proteins, cells, things which shouldn't be there. And it has many functions in different diseases, and it's like inflammation, that not enough autophagy is linked to so many illnesses, the same as inflammation ties into so many illnesses, and poor mitochondrial function ties into many illnesses. So just to briefly go over it, it's there's different kinds of autophagy depending on what you're destroying. And it's not like a Pac-Man going around eating things in the body. It happens from the inside. So the cells are sort of self-destroying and then self-eating. You've got mitophagy, which is when old and damaged mitochondria are removed, but then you'd get the same for old and damaged endoplasmic reticulum and other organelles in the body. Medicinally, because plaques in the arteries and plaques in the brain shouldn't be there, there's emerging evidence that autophagy plays a role in using these or breaking them down to help prevent things like cardiovascular disease and things like dementia, which have a relationship with plaques in the brain. There's also lipophagy, where it's the breakdown of fat, which is autophagy related, and the connective tissue around the fat cells. So I know there's lots of people on the internet say that if you fast, you can get rid of all the loose skin and stuff. And I don't know for certain whether there's evidence for that, but there's definitely anecdotal evidence. So when people do want to lose a large amount of body fat, they are worried about all this connective tissue that the fat was sitting in. And thankfully, autophagy can help to gobble up this tissue. Then there's, of course, talk about autophagy helping to prevent cancer by destroying precancerous cells. I don't know whether it can actually destroy a tumor. That's another topic, and it's complicated. I don't think you can necessarily starve a tumor out, because cancer cells and tumors are very clever genetically, so you can end up making things worse. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm very for prevent the problem before it gets too serious. The other useful aspect of autophagy is how it can destroy immune cells which have, we can say, gone rogue or got confused and have started attacking the cells in the body. So that would be diseases like ankylosing spondylitis, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis. And many people find that even after a 3-day fast, there's a big reduction in their symptoms. And then via many processes, autophagy can also help to activate longevity genes like the FOXOs and the sirtuins, but other things activate them as well. And the things which inhibit autophagy are pretty much glucose, insulin, branch chain amino acids and fats, because ultimately it's triggered by being in a starvation mode, so it's nutrient sensing. But there are other things which also affect autophagy. But the main thing is, if you want autophagy, you pretty much need to fast to get it. You can't really get it other ways. There are ways to encourage it, but fasting is the gold standard. So another thing which people talk about a lot, which relates into fasting, muscle building, cancer, is something called mTOR, which is mammalian target of rapamycin. And it's a nutrient sensing protein kinase, and it's important for health and longevity. And during a fast, as I said earlier, mTOR gets inhibited, but we don't want to inhibit mTOR all the time because it has many positive effects. It's the main growth pathway, so you need it for cell regeneration, also for muscle growth. So people who are interested in bodybuilding and such like, they're all for stimulating mTOR. But also for older people, the loss of muscle, such as sarcopenia, is a very, very big sort of morbidity factor. So losing muscle isn't a good thing. And then mTOR plays a role in memory and neuroplasticity and insulin sensitivity. So it's not a bad thing. It's like everything. It's about balance. But the negative effects are it can promote aging. It can promote the growth of some tumors. It's worse for people who've already got a problem with cancer. And again, it inhibits autophagy. And the little reference down below, it's an interesting paper all about overfeeding, I think it was mice, and how that really encouraged fatty liver. because mTOR was being stimulated all the time. And as most people know, people have started doing that now, where a study was done once and they found that some people ate up to 10 times per day, and the average was something like about 5, and only a small percentage of the people were eating what we used to think we should do was 3 meals a day, but lots of people think that's far too many as well. There's an interesting little paper, but again, like I said, mTOR isn't all bad. And the things which activate mTOR, as I've said, anything to do with nutrients, so that'd be glucose, insulin, particularly amino acids, particularly leucine, and that affects mTOR C1 without affecting mTOR C2. Without getting too detailed, there are different mTORs which are into slightly different tissues, but again, you can look it up a bit afterwards if you want to learn more. Also, androgens tend to activate mTOR, but that would make sense because it is a growth pathway. And then to inhibit mTOR, there's, as I've said, nutrient deprivation, but also exercise inhibits mTOR C1 in the liver and fat cells, but not in the muscle cells. And then there's something else which was definitely one of my favorite molecules in biochemistry is AMPK. This inhibits mTOR as well, and this is sort of at the heart of a lot of the benefits of fasting. So I'll come back to AMPK later. So another thing which I mentioned earlier is thyroid, because people get very excited about thyroid and ketogenic diets and fasting, saying that if you do that, you'll ruin your thyroid, which, like everything, it depends. So briefly, for people who are not familiar with it at all, we've got like the more complicated diagram on the left, where we've got thyrotropin releasing hormone telling the pituitary to produce some TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. And then this comes down and the thyroid makes its hormone out of tyrosine and iodine, and it makes something called T4, which is thyroxine, but this is the inactive form of thyroid, and this can go off then to be made into reverse T3 and T3. The diagram on the other side is a more sort of simple way to explain to people all brand new to thyroid what all this means. So we can pretend that the T4 is sort of like the coffee bean, and you can't make a cup of coffee out of that, you need to grind it. So we have our ground coffee, which is the T3, the useful active thyroid hormone. Then in an imaginary scenario, if you locked your ground coffee up in a coffee jar and threw away the key, that would be your reverse T3. So it's sort of like anti-thyroid. So when you've got high reverse T3 and low T3, that's saying that you have got a lot of inactive thyroid hormone going around in your body. The same would be if you've got lots of T4 and not very much T3. That's suggesting that you've got lots of, again, inactive thyroid and not active thyroid. So when it comes to diets and thyroid, we'll look into some research shortly, but the problem is, in my view, is there are so many other things which interfere with thyroid, which can pop out if you do change your way of eating or fast. So the first one is converting T4 into T3. So that's making ground coffee out of coffee beans. So mercury and cadmium inhibit the enzyme which does that, and mercury and cadmium are quite sort of systemic everywhere in our environment. We'll talk a lot about that later. Then you can have SNPs, which are sort of genetic variations in the genes in the enzymes which do the conversion. So some people naturally are just not very good at making T3. Then certain medications interfere with this, and some of them interfere with making T3 from T4, but they also encourage T4 to get made into reverse T3. So that would be like getting a ground coffee and then just locking it straight away in the coffee pot. So there are medications which can mess up this process as well. Also, as I said earlier, you need iodine to make thyroid hormone. So iodine deficiency can cause this. This can happen because table salt is iodized, and in New Zealand and also in the UK, they did a study and they showed that something like 2/3 of people got pretty much all their iodine requirements from table salt. And now we've got all these fancier salts like Himalayan salt, which is all great, but it's not iodized. Some people end up missing out on some iodine that way. Also, we've got things like sulforaphanes, which are in broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower, and they're even worse when you don't cook them. And these sulforaphanes steal the iodine, basically, so there's not as much left for the thyroid. Also, the other thing which lots of people get very excited about is fluoride, because fluoride or fluorine is more reactive than iodine, so it'll boot the iodine out of the active site of the enzyme, and then we won't get any thyroxine made. And there are ways around this. You can always filter your tap water, change your toothpaste to a non-fluoride toothpaste, but there's a lot of evidence that too much fluorine will interfere with thyroid. Then, as people know, prolonged calorie restriction and fasting will lower the amount of T3 you've got and raise your reverse T3. In general, with fasting, most people that do it for health benefits sensibly do sort of 2 to 3 to 5 days. And once you've finished your fast, after a couple of days, and the thyroid hormones go back to normal again. But in very long fasts, sort of like months or 2 months, or people who are doing a calorie restriction for like 6 months or a year, that's when you run into trouble, because it's been so repressed for so long. However, like everything, you can always get it going again, but that's another topic. There are also things which can damage the thyroid itself, like autoimmunity and Hashimoto's disease and radiation. And also, because all of these hormones bind to receptors, one of the overlooked things in thyroid problems is receptor damage, and things like inflammation can damage the receptors. And then we've got just general thyroid dysfunction, which would be inflammation, high estrogen, cortisol, oxalates, and again, prolonged calorie restriction. So when it comes to thyroid, there are so many other things that can affect it. You can't just blame a diet. So here's a few studies I looked into, and like lots of things in the literature, it's quite mixed. So the first group, their fat mass decreased, and it was a 6-week study, and they actually had more thyroxine at the end of the study. So this was a ketogenic diet, so no carbs. Then the next study I looked at, the usual happened. The T3 reduced and the reverse T3 increased, but these were on very, very, very low calorie ketogenic diets, but that would be expected. So that's just biochemistry doing its thing. We don't know what happened to the women once they stopped this diet. Did it go back to normal? Then there was a larger study on some epileptic children who have been following a ketogenic diet because it's known to help a lot with epileptic symptoms. And they found that 20 out of the 120 children developed hypothyroidism. So that's somebody that's growing, and it was over a year. So yes, it can cause hypothyroidism. And then there was another study which I looked into, and I put a picture at the bottom, where they had 20 obese patients who lost a significant amount of weight on a 4-month, very low calorie ketogenic diet. And if you visit the graphs at the bottom, there's actually pretty much no change in the amount of free T3 from week, or visit 1, which is the white bar, all the way up to the next white bar, which is in between, well, after the black one and the grey one. So again, it's all quite confusing. If you look in the literature, it'll just tell you sometimes it interferes with thyroid, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the age of the person, it depends on the gender, it depends on how long they're doing the diet for. But for yourself, you can always measure your thyroid hormones and just see what happens in your particular scenario. So for people who are interested in thyroid, there's many blood tests you can get, and they're not that expensive. In the UK, I think this panel costs about £150. So you're going to look at how well what your T3 uptake's like, how much free T3 you've got, how much total T3, because the T3 can bind to carrier proteins, and you've got your total T4, the reverse T3, the TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and then the TPO and the TGA down the bottom, which are relating to thyroid antibodies. So again, checking to see if you've got something called Hashimoto's. And it's worth looking if you're interested. I have quite a lot of friends who are doctors, so we often talk about blood tests in patients. And one day I asked a GP, of all the people that come in to you saying, I've got an underactive thyroid, this is why I can't lose weight, what percentage of them did when you actually did thorough tests? And she said, not very many. So then we were talking about, well, what else could it be? So we're going to look at a situation where we're just at normal body weight. So what's supposed to happen is, if you eat too much, or eat too many carbs, insulin goes up and tells the body to store fat, and which it will do. And then when the fat cells swell and get big enough, it basically telling the brain we're too fat and we need to do something about it. So what's supposed to happen is the appetite goes down and metabolism goes up, because leptin is released, and leptin stimulates metabolism and inhibits appetite. So the person stops eating, insulin goes down, and the body uses fat. So that's what's supposed to happen. And they've done studies on this, and when you force a person to gain, say, 15% of their body weight, in normal people, they really struggle right at the end to gain the extra weight. And as soon as they go back to their ordinary eating pattern, the weight just comes back off again very quickly. So they've done this on prisoners, men, women, college students, and across the board. When they increase the body weight by about 15%, usually the metabolism goes up by about 500 calories to try and get back to normal. Then on the converse, when a person loses weight and gets too thin, insulin goes down, and then the fat cells would get depleted, and leptin goes down, so it tells the person to start eating more, and the metabolism goes down, and then they return back to their normal body weight. And exactly the same thing happens, that when you do this to people in a study, they found that when they make them lose 10% more of their body weight over quite a short period of time, this happens, and they measure the metabolic rate, and it goes down by about 300 calories a day, and then it goes back to normal when the person goes back to their body weight set point. So this particular body weight set point is determined somewhat by genetics, but like everything, you can change your body weight set point. For people who are very obese or have been obese for a very long time, it's obviously going to be harder for them to lower their body weight set point versus, say, a celebrity or a college student who's just gained something like 20 pounds because of holidays and overindulgence. They can just get back to normal very quickly because they haven't been overweight for a long time. The other thing which happens when people are overweight for a long time is these swollen cells, they're pumping out leptin, produce inflammatory cytokines as well. And instead of being helpful, this now makes everything worse, because these inflammatory cytokines encourage fat storage and promote thyroid issues. And it's quite common knowledge now that lots of people are stuck in this sort of fat trap, that they've gained this weight, their leptin is gone really high, but the body or the brain's ignoring this leptin, so they've become leptin resistant, and they've got this inflammation going on which is messing up their thyroid, so they have sort of got stuck in a metabolic trap. But like anything, you can get out of the trap. So as I said earlier, this system can break, so you end up with people who are insulin resistant and leptin resistant. And luckily, it's very easy to get an serum insulin test from the doctors. They're very cheap. Leptin's a bit more complicated. It's quite a big thing. It's a little bit more expensive. But somebody who is struggling, it is worth measuring those two hormones. Leave the thyroid for the moment. And as I was talking about my doctor friend, when she did look into this, she did say, yes, we have noticed that these two hormones, leptin and insulin, seem to be out. You can't really do a lot about the leptin, but you can do a lot to reduce the insulin, which will then start to reverse this problem. And where does this really originate from? Well, it's actually coming from the sucrose, or the sugar, because first of all, the sugar is going to encourage the insulin resistance, or the high insulin. But also what fructose does is it first of all goes and blocks leptin receptors in the brain, so it inhibits appetite. And also fructose can get made into fat in the liver, de novo lipogenesis. And the problem with this is when we get a fatty liver situation, this is sort of driving insulin resistance from another direction. So people eating too much sugar is driving it one way, because the body constantly has to deal with the sugar that's coming in through the mouth. But then now it's being driven the other way, from inside, from the liver that's become fatty. So that's where the person is sort of in a bit of a situation. But as I've said earlier, very easy way out of this is to change your way of eating to get the insulin to go down, and in general the rest of this will start to balance itself out. So another interesting hormone that we come across in fasting is growth hormone. So I talked a bit about thyroid earlier, so just to remind you, we have this here. So back to our picture of the thyroid and the different hormones. And the thing about thyroid hormone is it promotes the metabolism of fat, carbohydrate, and protein. So that would mean lean muscle mass. So here, this is why when you fast, you end up having a large increase in growth hormone. So if you cast your eyes to the graph, so we've got the control, and then we've got from even after day one, you can see that there's a significant growth hormone peak. And then we get to day 5. The interesting thing that's happened here is that it's not just coming out in pulses, because growth hormone likes to come out at a certain time of the day in a pulse. You've actually got growth hormone being expressed constitutively, so it's sort of there all the time in the background to help preserve the muscle mass. And growth hormone works in 2 ways. It can work by going to the liver, and then via being converted into IGF-1, it can then work to have effects on the bones to keep them strong, the nerves and the muscles. So it's protecting things in the body during a fast, for example, that could be damaged. So you obviously don't want to start getting osteoporosis when you're fasting, or body starting to degrade neurons. That's one way, but it also works in other ways. And what it does is, biochemically, is it opposes insulin. So it's not like glucagon that's the antagonist to insulin. It opposes it, so it encourages fat loss. Growth hormone also encourages the browning of white fat. It's because white fat is quite inert. The brown fat, or the beige fat, is the stuff that the body can use. It also increases bone density, exercise tolerance, performance, muscle strength. The growth hormone plays a big role in the skin effects that people get during a fast, because it's pretty common knowledge that the skin starts to look very nice, particularly if you do it regularly or for quite long. Also, growth hormone again plays a role in immune function, so it's protecting the body when you're fasting. The problem with growth hormone is because it encourages fat to be used and fat to come into the cell. If you abuse growth hormone, as in take too much of it from the outside, because you want all these benefits, you can end up being insulin resistant. And also, growth hormone does cause water retention, which in, say, a dry fast, that's something quite useful. But then in a normal person, too much growth hormone would create this problem. So for people who are interested in performance enhancing drugs, that's one of the main side effects that people who use growth hormone encounter, is water retention and insulin resistance. And as it is with biochemistry, there are lots of other interesting peptides, like growth hormone releasing peptides like GHRP2, MOD-GRF, and such like, which people use. So they don't actually make you make growth. What they do is they encourage the pituitary gland to make more growth hormone, then you take another peptide to make it come out. So you're sort of magnifying your own natural production. And people tend to get on all right with those if that's what they're into. When people start to add in loads and loads of growth hormone from the outside, that's when things can go wrong, because you could naturally suppress your own growth hormone and then get some unwanted side effects. However, you can make loads and loads of growth hormone all by yourself without adding anything in by doing a fast. Another thing which people fast or do the carnivore diet for, and it's a very important topic which you could go on for ages about, is inflammation. So I've tried to simplify it just so we can sort of look at it without getting too much into detail straight away. So as we know, diet and stress cause inflammation. Then we have drugs and toxins, infections, and obesity. And when inflammation gets triggered, it causes oxidative stress, genotoxic stress, activates things like TNF alpha. interferes with insulin and IGF signaling, because when the body thinks it's under attack from something like a pathogen, it's going to want more energy, more sugar. Again, that's another topic, but that does explain a lot of why when people take sugar away from their diet or follow the carnivore diet or fast, lots of immune problems go away. And then this feeds into something called NF-kappa beta, which is sort of quite an important mediator of inflammation. And when there's too much NF-kappa beta, you can get things that relate to aging. So you get less cell renewal, tissue damage, stiffness and pain. Then it's the age-related degenerative diseases like atherosclerosis, type 2 diabetes, dementia, arthritis. And then also with too much NF-kappa beta activation, you can get things like fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety, and gut issues. So these are all things which people complain about, and then they find when they follow a certain way of eating or fasting, lots of these go away. Then there are some other hormones and genes which help to inhibit NF-kappa beta, like the sirtuins, the FOXOs, and things like that. So it is something that you can control, and a lot of people find. I personally think that diet is the one of the major things, and toxins, which really feed inflammation. But of course, there are other things as well. So just for people who are more keen on, how does this actually work? Because whenever I learn something or somebody says, oh, fasting reduces inflammation, I have to know, well, how does it do it? What's the mechanism? So here we have TNF alpha, which is an inflammatory signal, we should say, has been activated for whatever reason, and it goes into the cytoplasm, and via a process, what happens is the NF-kappa beta is all tied up in a complex, as you can see. And the reason it's really hard to learn about immunology is because NF-kappa beta, as you can see up in the corner, has got lots and lots of different names because it's made up of different subunits, which confuses people massively. So you've got the NF-kappa beta in the middle, and it's all locked up, it's not doing anything. Then when you've got some phosphate and some ubiquinone as well, and IKKY complex, basically the P65 and the P50 part of the NF-kappa beta get freed, and they can go into the nucleus and set off a load of pro-inflammatory genes. So that would be cytokines, interleukins, things like that. So off it goes. And then in the unstimulated form on this side, you can see that the NF-kappa beta is locked up in its little complex. It's nowhere near the nucleus. There isn't excess phosphate around to encourage this process, and everything's happy. And there are lots and lots and lots of different compounds, lots of them are nutraceuticals that can block different interleukins, TNF alpha things. There's so many, but the problem is the process has already started. So in my view, it's better not to set off the inflammation right from the start, rather than trying to block it once it's got going. Now to another one of the proteins which I mentioned, so one of my favorite ones, which is adenosine monophosphate kinase, or AMPK. So AMPK does lots of interesting things, and it's activated in several ways. So to keep things simple, AMPK inhibits mTOR, so you inhibit the protein synthesis, and then via ULK1 and mTOR inhibition, we get our autophagy. So that's one benefit, and one reason that people chase after AMPK activation. Then we get activation of fatty acid breakdown, which would mean making ketones, which is of course very useful. And then we get inhibition of fatty acid synthesis. So what AMPK does, it sort of senses how much ATP, ADP, and AMP there is in the cell. So it's sort of sensing how much energy do we have in the cell, and do we need to turn some processes up to get energy out of fat, and should we turn some processes we don't really need for the moment, like protein synthesis, down. And there's another protein called liver kinase B1, which activates which activates AMPK. And there are things which activate liver kinase B1 or LKB1, which is then going to go off and activate AMPK. So also exercise activates AMPK, or anything where you've got like low ATP and high AMP. So here we have a little bit more detail about AMPK, because you can activate it by lowering AMP, which would be so exercise, fasting, such like. Then you get a 10%, sorry, a 10 times activation. But then if you activate AMPK via LKB1, you get 100 times more activation. So that the aim of the game is to activate the AMPK from lots of different ways. So when you activate it via LKB1, you get the phosphorylation. So that's that little P there where things have all lit up. And then when you do it via the AMP, which is the low energy state of the cell, you get your 10 times activation. So if you're interested in stuff like this, it's advisable to learn different ways to activate AMPK, so you can sort of hit this system, so you can hit it from different angles. Then a little bit more detail of what happens when you activate when you activate AMPK. It increases glucose uptake, it increases glycolysis, it increases mitochondrial biogenesis via something called PGC1 alpha, inhibits fatty acid oxidation, inhibits mTOR, inhibits fatty acid synthesis, and it can inhibit sterol synthesis and glycogen synthesis. On the left side, it's just done something wrong with the presentation here. So it's showing all the different compounds that are AMPK activators. So we've got omega-3s, the capsaicin from chili, resveratrol, quercetin, alpha-lipoic acid, berberine, curcumin, metformin, and then in relation to metformin. And the interesting things about all these molecules is they all activate AMPK in a slightly different way. So there's another big advantage to activating AMPK. It's because of things which do bother people, which are leaky junctions or leaky cell junctions. So you can get leaky brain, leaky liver, leaky gut. And what AMPK does is it helps to tighten up these junctions again. It doesn't matter about the exact mechanism. You can check out the reference below. But this is very important and exciting for people who want to heal things, because the gut and leaky gut is at the root of so many problems. And also AMPK activation can suppress intestinal inflammation. So it reduces inflammatory cytokines, certain macrophages, inhibits certain T cells, but also it encourages mucus secretion, which can help protect the gut and enhances autophagy. So that would be autophagy in a situation where you want to get rid of things in the gut that you don't want and prepare it for healing. So there's a big benefit there for activating AMPK. Also, something else which activating AMPK does is it can inhibit NF-kappa beta, which I talked about a bit earlier. So in terms of cardiovascular health, when you inhibit NF-kappa beta, you can get more macrophage or M2 polarization, less cytokines, less lipid accumulation, less leukocyte homing. So that would be sort of the immune side of causing vascular inflammation. But also, even better, AMPK can interact with something called eNOS, which is nitrous oxide or nitric oxide. I've made a mistake there. So you get more nitric oxide production, and this is very helpful for vasodilation and other aspects of cardiovascular health. And also via the FOXOs and the SERT genes, you can get a reduction in reactive oxygen species, and you can also manage something called the unfolded protein response, and which helps to reduce stress in the endoplasmic reticulum. So people always talk about healthy mitochondria, but the endoplasmic reticulum and how it functions is really important as well. So this is another example of why AMPK is so useful, and why activating it by whichever means you choose is something to consider. Also, there's another player in this little biochemistry story, which people who are interested in anti-aging and things will know about, or people who are just interested in biochemistry, is about NAD+, because this is really important for lots of processes, but also it's very important for repairing DNA, and that's what lots of it gets used to do, is to sort of repair our DNA. When people do a fast, you will get your AMPK activation, and then you can get activation of the SIRT1 gene. But also the problem with this is if you put resveratrol in or starve for too long, you'll actually deplete your NAD+. So it's actually going to be counterproductive. So you need a way to activate this pathway, keep your NAD+ reasonable so you're not depleting it. And this is what this next little diagram's about. So when people have done studies on resveratrol, sometimes it's really helpful and in cell culture, and sometimes it killed the cells. So people couldn't work out for ages what was going on. But what can actually happen is too much resveratrol or too much fasting can actually inhibit NAD plus production, and then you don't get the activation of the SIRT genes that you want, and you run into other problems of low NAD plus. But interestingly, there's a compound called quercetin, which can actually restore NAD plus levels when you've got resveratrol there as well, and when you're fasting. So often, no matter what the process is in biochemistry, is if you understand what's going on, you can find a way to help a cycle run smoothly again. So that's why resveratrol, in my view, is a great compound, but it can be a bit of a two-edged sword. And also, if you don't know how to use it properly, again, it can be a problem. But we'll come back to these nutraceuticals later and the best way to take them and use them, because just taking powders doesn't work. That's why all of the studies on all these plant molecules were done in tissue culture, where you've just got naked cells. And then when you go and try and do it in people or animals, it doesn't work properly. So the moral of the story here is NAD plus is important, and you want to maintain its level regardless of what you're doing. So in a carnivore way of eating, I wouldn't say this is relevant, because you're not in a starvation mode, and you wouldn't be using resveratrol and be eating loads of sort of grapes and stuff like that. However, for people that want to fast or use resveratrol, it's very important to understand that you can end up causing yourself a little bit of trouble if you're not sure what you're doing. Okay, so I'll come back now to this diagram here. So again, just recapping for people who this is all brand new to, fasting, exercise, certain compounds, to some extent, ketogenic diets will activate AMPK, and that's going to inhibit mTOR. So we've talked about mTOR already. So it's inhibiting anything to do with growth. And also, as I said earlier, AMPK promotes tight junction formation, which is very useful for good cellular structure. PGC1 alpha also goes off and does a whole lot of other things. So it can interact with other proteins. And on the left, we have interacting with TR1 beta and the NRFs, which we'll come to later, for mitochondrial biogenesis. So it would be sort of growing and healing and improving mitochondrial function. Then it interacts with estrogen receptors, which feed into a little bit of mitochondrial biogenesis, mainly glucose utilization and fatty acid oxidation. And then we come into these other interesting these are transcription factors, the PPAR alphas. So what are those? So they're peroxisome proliferator activated receptors, and they are a group of nuclear receptor protein that functions as a transcription factor, and they regulate the expression of genes. And for people who are interested in like sports performance or enhancement or bodybuilding or endurance, you might have heard of cardarine. And cardarine does interact with the PPAR beta gammas. So that's why people like this compound, because it encourages fatty acid oxidation, improves endurance. So like most things, there's different kinds of PPARs, and they're found in slightly different parts of the body. And in general, very useful effects. We've got detoxification and antioxidant effect from the PPAR betas, and then we've got fatty acid oxidation from the PPAR alphas and gammas. So there is more to it than this. It's just to explain what else when you activate AMPK, what else gets activated, and how does this help, and how does it help to explain some of the benefits of what we're talking about. So we've covered sort of the main biochemical pathways of how fasting and related ways of eating can be very beneficial for inflammation, for fat loss, for diabetes, for leptin resistance, how it may or may not do something to the thyroid, too many other factors. So people now are probably thinking, oh, maybe I'll have a go at a fast, or people might fast already. And when it comes to ending a fast, this is something I just wanted to touch on briefly, but more for people who have got interested now and wanted to try something. So when you end a fast, this is like, because Bart and I also did a long fast, and it's particularly important if you've done something that's beyond 3 days. So meat is too hard to digest, as is dairy. It shouldn't end a fast with carbs or sugar, because it'll spike the insulin too much and basically shock the body. Bread is even worse, because you're putting gluten into this lining in your gut that hasn't seen any food for ages, so that's an extremely bad idea. Alcohol pushes open the lining of the gut anyway, so it does encourage leaky gut, so you definitely wouldn't want to finish a fast with sort of like a glass of whiskey. And then anything else hard to digest, like nuts and seeds, well, they've got all kinds of unpleasant things in them as well, but wouldn't want to finish a fast on with them. And also takeaways, because they're so inflammatory, really not a good idea. For people ending a dry fast, because some people do them for up to 3 to 4 days, it would be bicarbonate of soda dissolved in water, say like half a litre, wait a bit, then coconut water, and then bone broth, because you've got all of the electrolytes to rebalance, and you don't want to trigger something called refeeding syndrome, which is not just overeating like crazy. It's you can really mess up your body's physiology because of the electrolytes need rebalancing. Also, another thing which is important post-fasting is because people do it because they want to lose weight, but then they want to maintain body weight. So those for people who are fasting for weight losses, you don't want to suddenly, in about a week or so, start just going back to your normal ways of eating and spoiling everything you did in the fast. So this is just a little diagram about satiety, but this I found relates into the carnivore diet as well, and keto diets, because lots of people say, oh, I start this way of eating and my appetite is really under control now. So we've got things like ghrelin, cholecystokinin, GLP-1, PYY, insulin, amylin, and leptin. And protein stimulates PYY, fats stimulates cholecystokinin, and then we've got eggs, nuts, avocado stimulating GLP-1, and then fiber. Yes, there's lots of issues about fiber, stimulates the stretch receptors. So after I've finished my fast and things, I'm always very keen to eat foods that are going to hit these particular satiety buttons per se, so that there isn't any kind of sort of not binging, but sort of going back to bad habits. But again, it would explain why people who do follow the carnivore diet and are very successful and do feel, like I've lost weight, my appetite's under control. It could be that you've picked certain foods which are stimulating these pathways. So now into another topic which is important, not just for people who are interested in fasting and want to have a go, but I think for everybody. So a lot of what happens when people fast or go keto or do carnivore is they get something called, like whatever it is, the carb withdrawal or the fasting flu. It doesn't happen to everybody, of course, but it does happen to some people. And it makes me very sad when people just give up on the way of living because this happened and they didn't want to understand why and how can I overcome this. So some people just sit it out and they're fine, but I think a lot of it is to do with toxins, because as we've gone through this particular sort of little journey, I haven't talked about toxins very much yet, but you're going to start to upregulate your glutathione and cholesterol during a fast or a carnivore diet. So that's going to encourage one part of the detox process. Then when fat gets broken down, which happens if you do things properly, if that's what your goals are, toxins are released. The heavy metals, they get disrupted a little bit as well. So we've got this situation where these toxins are coming out, and the body's not used to it, and loads of the symptoms of toxin overload is fatigue, brain fog, kidney pain, and such like. Also, then we've got the fat soluble toxins like plastics, PCBs, parabens, and all of those, which are endocrine disruptors. They're usually estrogen mimetics, and they cause irritability, weight gain, brain fog, inflammation, thyroid issues, sleep issues, and even some cancers. And then one of the worst of all is the bacterial endotoxin, the lipopolysaccharide LPS, which is when your body thinks it's under attack. So what happens with this is it's broken down bits of bacteria that get into the blood, and then your body thinks you've got a full-scale infection, so it mounts a massive response, and you get systemic inflammation. And then this particular compound is very, very neuroinflammatory as well. So in a way, once you know about these different toxins and how they behave and how to get them out, I think for people who are starting something or struggling a bit with these symptoms, will find it very helpful. The other thing which happens is with fasting is, I haven't gone into this about what electrolytes that you need to take. So you need to have adequate sodium and potassium and magnesium. And some people do water fast, which isn't really a good idea. So you'll just deplete yourself of electrolytes. However, some people just say, oh no, you've not taken enough salt, this is why you've got these symptoms, just up your salt. But what salt can do is it can actually cause reuptake of some of these toxins, so the symptoms actually go away, but you've just masked them. So a little bit more about these toxins and where you might find them and what they might do. So there's mercury, and mercury loves binding to sulfurs in proteins. So when it comes to methylmercury from fish, it's the protein it's binding to, not the fat. And mercury inhibits hundreds, if not thousands, of enzymes. Like if you're doing a biochemistry assay and you want it to be inhibited, if you chuck mercury in, it'll pretty much work every time. It also interferes with enzymes that use zinc for doing their job. And interestingly, the symptoms of mercury can look like something look like something else. So it would be anxiety and adrenal fatigue, because what mercury does is it ramps up the fight and flight system, because it makes everything oversensitive to glutamate. So your glutamate goes further, so your body's constantly in this fight or flight state, which will then encourage anything that's a stress-related illness. Eventually it starts to lead to adrenal fatigue, and people will try all kinds of different methods to solve these problems, where mercury, for some people, that's what's doing it. As I said earlier, unfortunately, fish does have a lot of methylmercury in it, and I'm pretty sure that tuna and swordfish are the worst. Definitely the swordfish. So the bigger the fish and the longer it's lived, the more mercury it will have collected. And the inorganic mercury comes from the environment. As I said earlier, mercury messes up thyroid function by inhibiting T4 to T3, and cadmium does this too. And also mercury damages thyroidoxin, which is sort of a bit like glutathione. It's a protein that goes around the body and repairs other damaged proteins. It does a lot more than that, but it's like mTOR or autophagy. You could do a whole talk on all the things which thyroidoxin do, but it's something you don't want to have low thyroidoxin. Another problem metal is nickel, because it looks a bit like manganese, zinc, and calcium and magnesium. It interferes with any enzyme that uses these as cofactors, so it can cause a wide range of unpleasant symptoms. And mercury comes from air and water, so we can't really, nickel comes from air and water, so it's hard to avoid. But some of the main culprits of nickel are nuts, dried beans, peas, soybeans, grains, and chocolate. So some people who got rid of all of those out of their diet and got wonderful results, it could possibly have been not just the oxalates causing a problem, but also the nickel. Then we come into lead, which most people are aware of being a problem, and it gives the emotional issues of being angry all the time. Because when they banned leaded petrol, which I can't remember what year exactly it was, when they did studies on violent crimes, it had gone down significantly. So it was attributed sort of less lead in the atmosphere. So it causes things like headaches, high blood pressure, stomach issues. And then the other unpleasant thing which lead does is it resides in the bones and it promotes osteoporosis. And then as that person who goes from being osteopenic, so the beginning of osteoporosis, starts to get into fully blown osteoporosis, all the lead comes out and then it starts going around annoying other things in the body. But it also, the lead itself harms osteoblasts, so you're just going to accelerate osteoporosis more. Then we've got arsenic, which a bit like nickel, interferes with lots and lots of enzymes, and it's particularly bad for disrupting enzymes and pathways to do with DNA repair and synthesis. So whenever you interfere with DNA repair and synthesis, it's leaving everything wide open for cancer. And arsenic has been classified as a known human carcinogen, causing numerous different kinds of tumours. Also, arsenic plays a role in peripheral neuropathy and brain, I wouldn't say damage, but issues with the brain. So it's something that you don't want to have in you. And I think a lot of it comes environmentally, because there are certain areas in the world where there's lots of arsenic in the soil. And I remember there was a study on paddy fields in China, and the rice was pretty much swimming in arsenic. So then when the people were eating the rice, they were getting contaminated. But it is something that unfortunately is quite systemic in the environment. And I think through food is where people do run into problems with getting arsenic toxicity. But it is something, if you're interested in, you can look into. So now we've looked at, we've got these horrible toxins which are going to interfere with hormones and cause brain fog and all of these nasty things. What can we do about it? So starting at the very beginning of biochemical detox, we've got something called the microcosm. So that's a process of where the metals and the toxins move out of binding sites in enzymes, and the toxin gets activated, sort of like gets caught, and then it gets conjugated to glutathione, or there are several other things, and it gets moved out of the cell. So this would be called phase 1 and 2. It's just the name given to the detoxification process. So all cells can, to some extent, get their toxins out of where they shouldn't be, stick some glutathione on, and then it's ready to try and move the toxin on. So then we come into the membranes, which is part of phase 3, because there are several toxin transporters, the MRPs and OATPs, and these are special doors in the membrane. So you need a healthy membrane and these particular proteins in the right place in the membrane, so the toxins can get out of the cells and into the blood and then into the liver, and then through the liver, out of the liver, and so on, which I'll come to in a moment. So we're at our macrocosm, the phase 3, where we've got to move the conjugated toxins from the blood and the lymph to the liver, mix it with the bile, into the GI tract, out into the toilet, and then some of the toxins are going to go out through the kidneys, skin, and lungs. The gut is meant to take the lion's share of the toxins, but the other 3 can help a lot as well. So this would be like a picture version of the ideal scenario. So we have our toxins coming out of the cells, being processed in the cell by phase 1 and 2. Then they come out of the cell by phase 3 into the blood, into the liver, mixing with the bile, into the intestine, and into the toilet. And then, as I said before, some of it will also go out through the kidneys and through the skin. So that's why some people, everything's working really well, so they just fast or just do carnivore, everything's working really smoothly, and they don't have this problem with toxins. They may not have had a particularly big toxin load to start with, or they might be healthy enough to deal with the toxins that are coming out in the fat if they're doing it for weight loss, and then there's no problem. So a bit more into phase 1 and phase 2, so getting a little bit more complicated. So phase 1, I always think of it as like the toxin is like an armed robber, and you want to disarm the armed robber. So in phase 1, the drugs and the toxins and the xenobiotics and the hormones and the cellular waste get processed by the cytochrome P450 family of enzymes. And then you end up with an activated toxin. It's a bit like a free radical. Metals don't go through phase 1 because they're already activated. So now this toxin has sort of been discovered and you're ready to stick something on to transport it. Interestingly, grapefruit and some antidepressants slow down phase 1, and things like St. John's wort and modafinil speed it up. It's quite well known about St. John's wort because it does massively interfere with medication, because you just process it much quicker, and grapefruit does the opposite. That's why some people I know, like raving, will take grapefruit juice because they want to slow down the metabolism of the interesting drug that they've taken. It's just useful to know if you are on medication about different plants and things which are going to change the detoxification process. So once we've got our activated toxin, like a free radical, the next phase is sort of being handcuffed and captured. So it's being conjugated to glutathione. There are other things as well, like methyl groups and sulfur and glucuronate, which you can add to toxins as well. But for now, we'll just stick with glutathione. So you end up making a glutathione conjugate. So glutathione S transferase does this reaction, and the purpose of this is to make the toxin water soluble if it wasn't already, but also transportable and recognizable to transport proteins. So it's sort of like capturing your armed robber, handcuffing him, and starting to take him towards the police station or to prison. So glutathione is something very important in this process, as I've just mentioned. And again, fasting upregulates glutathione. People are quite comfortable with that. Also, a diet with sufficient meat ensures there are plenty of precursors for glutathione production. And because acetylcysteine is one of these, or N-acetylcysteine is one of these precursors. And if you glance over to the side, the writing's a bit small, but glutathione's made out of glutamate, cysteine, and glycine. So you need enough of these proteins to make glutathione. Or if you don't want to do it diet-wise, you can buy liposomal glutathione. So that would be glutathione in a liposome ready to use. And when it comes to changing ways of eating, some people's bodies are perfectly happy making their own glutathione out of a good diet. Other people do it using fasting. Some people take the supplement route, but it all depends on your status at the time. So if you're very unwell and you feel that you needed some extra glutathione, it's a very friendly, nice supplement to take, but it has to be in a liposome, otherwise it won't work, because if you just ate glutathione, the stomach acid would just chop it back up again into amino acids. And there's lots of studies on the things which happen when you've got low glutathione, which would be neurodegenerative disease, oxidative stress, depression, type 2 diabetes. So it's a bit like inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, not enough autophagy. That glutathione is once again one of these sort of key players in health. And then when we get into phase 2, I'll just call it the detox system for now. So this is where you're starting to add different things onto your toxins. So it might be methyl groups, it might be sulfur, but there are also loads of other genes and things which get switched on in this detox system, which I'll come to shortly. So the main player at the heart of this is something called NRF2, and people who are interested in fasting will have come across this, or people who are interested in hormesis and carnivore diet will have heard this mentioned before. And what it does is it activates a lot of genes for antioxidant and detoxification processes. So it's sort of our natural defense mechanism or chemoprotectant. So this is where the polyphenols come in again, because resveratrol, haritaki, quercetin, curcumin, green tea extract, and a whole load of others, they activate NRF as well. Sulfur compounds, they're stronger NRF activators. That's where you've got alpha lipoic acid, garlic, onion and leek extract. So those some of the sulfur ones are a bit stronger, but also exercise and other stressors like hot, cold and saunas will switch NRF2 on as well. So it's a bit like AMPK. It's really important, but there's lots of ways to turn it on. And for people who are quite delicate, if they turned NRF2 on all in one massive go, that they'd overload their systems because the body's not ready to deal with all of these toxins all trying to get out. So again, it's something about knowing that it exists, but if it's a sort of delicate person, not to take the heavy guns or the big guns in straight away and sort of build up gradually. For a more healthy person, yes, that's totally different. If you want to throw everything at the problem all at once, that's fine. Another thing which is important is people who've got lots of mold toxin or Lyme toxin, this blocks NRF2. And because with these polyphenols, if you throw them all in with a blocked up NRF2, you're just sort of harming your cells because you're not switching on what you want to switch on. So then these particular compounds become a toxin because they're not switching on your detox system and therefore just harming the cell. But there are other routes you can take to do with trying to get Lyme and mold toxins out, which I'll come to later. So this is what I meant about how when you activate the detox system, what happens. So obviously your body's got all of its own natural antioxidants, and they're much more powerful than the antioxidants that you take from the outside. So you've got TPX, SOD, like all sorts to activate your antioxidants. Then you've got your transporters, the MRP1s and MRP2, OATP. So they get upregulated when you activate NRF2. Then you've got your conjugation enzymes, which are in the detoxification phase. So you've got special enzymes for transferring sulfurs and glutathione onto toxins. And then also on the other side, we've got the thyroidoxin, the glutathione disulfide oxoreductase. So they sort of regulate the whole detox and repair process. And then in the middle, we've got things like glutathione, lipoic acid, vitamin C and E, coenzyme Q10 and B vitamins. I should have put magnesium in there as well, because these are things which you need adequate amounts of for all this process to run smoothly. And if you're obviously taking statins, that's a problem here because you're going to have less CoQ10. If you're not getting your B vitamins from a sort of animal source and you're taking them in the wrong form, you're not going to have enough. And like anything, if you want to supplement, that's all fine. But as I'll come to later, liposomes are the way forward for working with this kind of pathway, because when you take something in a liposome, it's going to be activated, it's going to be absorbed in about 20 minutes. And all of this process here is really quick. So if you take these things just ordinarily, it might be 5 or 6 hours before they get into the system. And by then, everything's all started. So it's this idea of if you want to do supplementation, you've got to get things in as quickly as possible, because also lots of them turn genes on as well. So you need a big pulse. There are then, of course, caveats and other little things to bear in mind. So unfortunately, aging and inflammation downregulate all of this system. So if somebody's inflamed already and they want to start to detox, they've already got a hampered system. So they'd be people who supplementation would be important for, or slowly. NRF2 activation, which is the thing above this, can only be sustained for about 10 days. So that's why, in my view, fasting for too long is actually counterproductive, because you've sort of saturated your benefits and now you're just running into problems. So it's a good idea, if you're interested in detox or fasting, to have a break to let everything sort of resensitize again. The other thing which gets in the way of this is too much vitamin C and vitamin E, because they're going to inhibit free radicals, and naturally free radicals are the things which set off this pathway. So if you take them all away, you're going to run into trouble getting things to work properly. So you don't need to be troughing a ton of vitamin C. It can actually get in the way of this process. A little is fine, but not too much. And then the other thing to consider is after the age of 40, coenzyme Q10 levels have dropped about 40% in the heart and the lungs, and it doesn't start to drop in the liver till about the age of 60. But all it means is if you're a bit older and you're interested in stuff like this, or just health in general, taking a Q10 supplement is advisable. Okay. So if we move into like how does the liver process these toxins? So far we've got a situation where we've got the toxins out of the cell successfully, and they've been conjugated to something. So they've been arrested, and now they're being transported to the liver or the police station so they can go out on the correct destination. So what's supposed to happen is in the liver we've got our OATP transporters and the NTCB transporters. So what will happen is the toxins will come along, go in through this door into the hepatocyte, and the liver's really good at doing phase 1 and 2. So it'll have loads of toxins already inside. Then what's meant to happen next is the toxins mix with the bile salts and something called phosphatidylcholine, which is very, very good for membrane health, but also make sure that the bile doesn't end up accidentally damaging the liver, because the bile is actually a detergent as well. If all goes well, then the toxins go out to the MRP2s and other transporters into the bile, and then off they go to the gut for the next phase. So with bile, it's of course important for fatty acid and glucose metabolism, and as I've just said, it's really important for toxin and waste removal. But the other important thing that bile does is it cleans the upper GI tract, so it's like a special wash for the upper GI, and it kills microbes as well, and also is going to carry glutathione to the gut. So already there's a clue here that the liver and NRF2 and these transporters and this process has got something important to do with the gut. So when all of this goes wrong for different reasons, then problems start to happen. So what happens is the toxins successfully get into the liver, but because of different reasons such as inflammation or bacterial endotoxin, these particular receptors that want to move the toxin out of the liver into the bile have come out of the membrane and are now sitting in the vesicle, not doing anything. So the toxins, like anything, will just go back out the way they came and back into the blood. So here, this is where this link of leaky gut and toxin overload starts to reveal itself. So endotoxin can create this, which is called cholestasis. So can not enough bile salts, not enough phosphatidylcholine, unhealthy membranes in the liver. Leaky liver would also cause this. So then what happens now is the toxins have gone out of the liver the wrong way. They're in the blood, so they can go around and give unpleasant symptoms throughout the body, like kidney pain, rashes. Rashes are often when there's bile, too much bile that went the wrong way. That's a good sign that there's something going wrong in the liver. And then we get the brain fog, because when you've got leaky gut and leaky liver, most of the time you've got leaky brain barrier as well. So then you get all these unpleasant symptoms. So there are different things which cause cholestasis. So too much estrogen can. Inflammation and endotoxin are big ones. A diseased or unhealthy liver that's just not very good at doing this process. Bile obstruction, that will also do it as well, but doing a bile flush is a little bit complicated, but is something to consider. And then of course low cholesterol and phosphatidylcholine, because as I said earlier, bile is made from cholesterol, so another reason not to go messing around with your cholesterol with drugs. However, there are also very useful plant products such as dandelion, gentian, milk thistle and burdock, which can help with this process, sort of restoring function. And then you've also got your phosphatidylcholine, which you could take to improve the health of the liver cells. So for people who are interested in nutraceuticals, it's those four that can help. But again, in a liposome form, because all this happens so quickly, you haven't got hours and hours to wait for your nutraceutical to be absorbed. So now if we move on to the gut. So if people could choose one thing or one product or one group of detox, I would say it'd be the binders or things to help the gut get the toxins out. So the problem is if the gut or the upper GI is inflamed, or the bile can't get out of the liver, the toxins end up being reabsorbed back into the blood. But then also they can end up in the gut. It's all crazy and inflamed in there. The toxins can't get out through the rest of the GI tract into the toilet, so they can just get reabsorbed and the whole process starts all over again. So as I said earlier, the LPS, which is the lipopolysaccharide, massively interferes with cholestasis, and it also inflames the gut, but it is a consequence of leaky gut. It's bacterial endotoxin leaking out, and it contributes a lot to SIBO. And LPS is also a very potent neuroinflammatory agent. So it's really bad if people have got neurological problems or Parkinson's or something already. And to make it worse, mercury and LPS work synergistically, so they egg each other on. So if you've got mercury and LPS, it makes everything even worse than it was of just having one or the other. And there's studies that have been done in the literature demonstrating this. So what could we do? So say if you do find yourself in this situation, you can use very simple things like binders, such as activated charcoal, zeolites, clays, silica groups with thiol groups on them to bind these toxins in the gut, and then you can pull them out. So that's why I said it's like the go-to. It's very, very simple, and anyone can do this. It won't hurt anybody. It's not expensive, and it won't do you any harm. Charcoal is great because it also binds LPS as well, so that's a real problem. And if you can get rid of that, you're doing really well. And something else which is really helpful is acacia gum, because it's a prebiotic, a gut soother, and it can bind some toxins. So it does help to calm all this process down so that the gut can start to settle down and heal, and then these toxins can be on their way. So now that we've been through all of these processes, just to summarize again, we have our phase 1, which is the activation of the toxin. Then we've got phase 2, where different groups are added on to the toxin, methylation, sulfation, adding glutathione. Then they go through the MRP1 cellular transporters. They're coming out of the cell now. Then they go through the OATP into the liver. Everything works perfectly in there. They come out where they belong, out of the MRP2s into the gut, and then out comes the toxins. It goes out through the gut into the toilet, and then the toxins can also get out through MRP3 receptors. So then they go into the blood, and the skin and the kidney will deal with the toxins happily because the gut did most of it. However, as I've mentioned earlier, we can get lots of blockages in this. So usually, well, phase 1 will always keep going. So no matter what, the body will always keep trying to arrest toxins, but then catching them and then getting rid of them, that's where the problems start. So what can happen here is we can have an inflamed gut, which then you end up getting LPS into the bloodstream, which is going to annoy the brain. That's also going to affect the process in the liver, the correct movement of the toxins out. The problem with LPS is it inhibits all of these doors in the membrane, the MRP1s, 2s, and the OATP, but it doesn't inhibit the back door in the liver, the MRP3. So it lets all the toxins just go back out into the blood, and that's where we end up with our problems, which can be brain fog, kidney pain, rashes, fatigue, and all kinds of other things, which, again, is stuff that a lot of people complain about. So hopefully from this, you've sort of got the idea that AMPK is really important, NAD plus is important, the liver is important, the bile is important, and the charcoal and the stuff that you bind in the gut is important. So this is just a quick little sort of list for people who have been following along and didn't have their notepad out, and I've explained what each of these compounds do. So when I was learning about this, because I always want to give credit to people who are really amazing, there's a scientist called Dr. Christopher Shade, and he has a business called Quicksilver Scientific, and he used to be a mercury detoxification chemist, and his knowledge on all of this is utterly phenomenal, and I'm totally blown away by it, but I find it invaluable. And also he's massively keen on making liposomes, so he has a business that sells all of these products in the correct dose and the correct form, because he's spent many years studying it. However, lots of these things you can find and get yourself, or like I've said before, there are ways of doing all of this without taking any kind of nutraceuticals. I wouldn't count activated charcoal as a nutraceutical, and obviously it's not made of plant, but I've just gone through things again for people who wanted to have it all on one page. Well, what can I do and how does it help? There are a few extra things here. So we've got on the right-hand side, because lead, you can catch it to some extent in the gut with toxins, but also liposomal EDTA can help. So before, people thought you could only get lead out by doing chelation intravenously, which is sort of massively stressful for the body. And also you can't just go and be chelated every day, whereas if you wanted to, you can take liposomes every day. Another thing which is a problem in this, which I haven't gone into because it's a whole other topic, are parasites and biofilms. So biofilms are where bacteria are just hiding. They've sort of made a force field around themselves and they're hiding underneath it. And there's a compound called artemisinin which can help with biofilms and parasites. So it comes from wormwood and it won a Nobel Prize for its sort of antimicrobial properties. And then there's something else called haritaki, which is a polyphenol. So it switches on NRF2, so the detox pathway, but it also is quite good at helping with gut healing and for getting rid of these biofilms, so you can clear out unwanted visitors in your body. Then, of course, we come into our kidney, and personally, what I found was the most useful was flushing oxalates out before embarking on massive biochemical changes. And I found that lemon juice and calcium citrate really helped. There is a flush for the gallbladder, but it's quite complicated, so I'm not going to mention it, but it is possible and it is worth doing your own research with. So here it's just sort of summing up, adding in external factors to help with your detox or your keto flu or your general health. And as I've mentioned liposomes quite a lot, the reason that they're important and why you should buy off somebody who knows how to make them and has studied them for a long time is that if you look on the right of the diagram, you can see that you can get all different sized liposomes. So it's basically like a miniature, like a cell that's empty, that's got nothing in it. So you put your drug or whatever inside your liposome. And the graph shows that the smaller the liposome, the better. So we've got the blue circle around the ones that are about 80 nanometers to 50. So it shows that pretty much anything over like 150 in a liposome is completely useless. So not only do you need to take your, whatever it is, your vitamin or your nutraceutical in a liposome, you need to find one that's going to be the right size, otherwise you're just wasting your money. Because I have got a big thing about supplement companies wasting people's money, and I'd never ever recommend anything ever other than looking into Quicksilver and just listening to what Dr. Shade has got to say, because he deserves to be mentioned for what he does. But loads of other supplements are just a waste of money. Then there was this graph on the other side here, the blue and red one, is just showing that when you take liposomal CBD versus non-liposomal CBD, the blue one shows that after about 20 minutes, you've got a great big like rise of CBD in the body. And as I said before, lots of these nutraceuticals activate genes and switch on processes, and it needs to be done in a pulse. It won't work if it's done over hours and hours. And also lots of the compound in a liposome get absorbed in the buccal cavity in the mouth and the throat, so they don't go anywhere near the gut bacteria, because they don't particularly want a load of curcumin and resveratrol being shoved on them, because they have antimicrobial properties, but you don't want to kill, you don't know who you're killing. So it's ideally you want to keep things like that out of the gut and where the bacteria and the processes happen. So that's another reason why liposomes are so useful, because of the rapid delivery. And then for people who are interested in this but really against supplements, which I completely respect because each their own, saunas are amazing for helping with fasting, I find, because there are studies to show that it deepens autophagy and also upregulates heat shock and cold shock proteins, and you can only get those upregulated from hot and cold. And saunas and ice also lower inflammation, speed up healing. But there's more to this. I've been quite brief. They do other things as well. They also activate NRF2. And the good thing about the sauna, which I discovered, was you can buy portable saunas, and that's a picture of the one I've got, and it's actually sweatier and better than the ones that I've been to in gyms. So and they're not expensive at all. And you can also make your own ice bath. I just use frozen peas because I can just refreeze them in the bag and use them over and over. So it's a very easy little routine that you can incorporate. And like things like grounding, it's so simple, but it is actually very, very effective. And also, the more you sweat, the more you're going to get toxins out through your skin and sort of spare your kidneys. So I think we've sort of finished our brief talk about the biochemistry of fasting. So just to summarize, fasting induces lots of favorable biochemical changes, and there are many overlaps with keto and carnivore. In my view, detoxification is something to consider. Even if you feel good, how do you know you couldn't feel even better? And if you're struggling, don't just give up. Look in a slightly different route. So, say if you started fasting or carnivore and it didn't go to plan, there's no reason your body can't fast or be carnivorous. There's something else in the way. And also, when it comes to detoxification, there are lots and lots of protocols, and they're very simple, but it does depend on what your needs are, whether you've got a gut problem, a lazy liver and bile system, low in glutathione, and also it depends on what you want to focus on detoxifying from your body, because you can get tests and it will show you whether you've got pesticides or mold toxin or lime or mercury or lead, and you can then tailor it to get rid of your problem. Also, there are loads and loads of combinations you can do of keto, carnivore, fasting, and there's not like one recipe that you all have to do. I find over like 20 years of, I would say, biohacking and experimenting with different things in science, there's so many different variations, and you just find what works for you. But also it depends on your goals, because as I mentioned earlier, we've got mTOR for muscle building, and we've got sort of AMPK and the PPARs for fat burning. So there are ways that you can sort of manipulate what you're doing to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. And also, it depends what you want your fasting or carnivore for, whether you want it to look good or feel good, or you're trying to heal a particular situation. There's different horses for courses. Then the next thing that happens is it depends on what symptoms or effects appear when you move to a new way of living or fast, because that can be a clue of where the problem resides. And like I always say, that you don't know whether I'm bullshitting to you. I've included references where I have, but it's always really important to do your own research on something and listen to lots of different people and have a dive into the literature. So there we go.
But there we go. Hey, look, thank you so much for sharing, quite briefly with us about what is really a vast, vast area of knowledge. There was so much good information there. I don't even know where to start. In the meantime, people need to know where to find you, Dr. Sara Pugh, don't they?
All right. My website's called The Busy Superhuman, but I'm easily contactable on Instagram. So it's just at Busy Superhuman. And then Facebook, Busy Superhuman or Sara Pugh. Or if you actually want to learn more and you're genuinely interested in this, you can go to my own personal website, which is sarapugleeds.co.uk, and then you can get in touch via email or phone. If you're serious about all of this. I'm very interactive with people on Instagram and Facebook. If you send me a message or comment or like, I'll always reply. And I'm also have a YouTube channel, which I've just started. So it's got some videos in it already, but I'll be adding more on sort of similar topics and things that people want to know about.
Brilliant. So we'll make sure we link that YouTube channel underneath so that people can go straight to that. I would suggest, obviously, if you haven't already got the idea for yourselves, get yourselves over there, get yourselves subscribed to Sara Pugh's channel pretty well now. Get it done, because it's a fantastic channel, I'm sure, and it will only do better with more of us. I'm going to go and subscribe myself straight after this. Last I spoke with Sara, she was talking about the channel, but she didn't tell me it was actually live yet. So
yeah, it's up.
Cool, awesome.
I'm quite a big Instagram fan as well, so yeah, I like that a lot. But yeah, I'm very approachable, and if somebody is interested, I'll answer questions. But again, obviously, like Bart says, I'll have to run a business and make a living. So if you want lots and lots of help, then I'm afraid you have to pay. But I'm very happy to answer things, and particularly if you've commented on a post or on a video, of course, I'll do my very best to answer it.
Brilliant. And that's all I think people can really ask. I think that's as fair as it comes. As I say, thank you once again. Brilliant presentation. Oh, here we go. Okay, so in the meantime, we'll sign off. Thank you very much
Yes.
for your interest. And as I say, do get yourselves over there, subscribe to Sarah's channel, and get hold of her through any of those other means that she's mentioned. So there we go. Okay, everything you need to know about fasting biochemically. There it was. And we will see you all again very soon.